Jovan, Buha! Buha!
Yo, yo. I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers reporter for Buha's Block, and welcome to another live show. Did not just get back from Crypto.com Arena because your boy is not feeling well. I could not wake up today. I cannot get out of bed. I cannot get off the couch. So made an executive decision to not attend the game. So I was watching from home like most of you, I would assume, but took a lot of notes on what was an interesting game, sometimes an ugly game, a gross game, but certainly some positives and some bright spots for the Lakers, despite losing 122 to 108 to the Portland Trailblazers to fall to 2-2 and 1-1 without Luka Doncic. LA was down 7 roster players. They only had 7 of their 14 official roster players and their 3 two-way guys, so 10 players overall. But among those 7, only 5 of them are projected every night rotation guys. So, and really there was a concentration of ball handling and shot creation out with no Luka, no LeBron, no Gabe Vincent, no Marcus Smart. So the offense, as it has the last couple of nights, ran entirely through Austin Reaves, with the offense really struggling in any other portion of the game. Whenever Austin was off the ball or whenever Austin was out of the game, Lakers really struggled to get the ball across half court, honestly, but struggled to get into the offense. And if not for transition, were really just not functioning at a high level in the half court with their sets. That was to be expected. Portland is one of the best defensive teams in the league. They are the type of team that on paper should give the Lakers problems with their perimeter length and size and athleticism. It's also the second night of a back-to-back for the Lakers, missing most of, again, their rotation. Second night of a back-to-back for Portland as well, but they are a bit younger and healthier than the Lakers were. But before we get started, you guys know the drill. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to the late night gang. Glenn noting that the Dodger game is still going on. Yes, I am trying to get some sleep tonight. I had a horrible night of sleep, and I think that was partly why I woke up feeling so rough, but wanted to go live as quickly as I could and get out of here in about an hour or so. But appreciate you guys for tuning in. So let's get into the overarching thought from tonight's game. For me, the first thing that comes to mind is Austin Reaves continues to excel. So Austin had 41 points tonight on 13 of 22 shooting, 3 for 8 on threes, 12 for 14 at the free throw line, 4 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals, 8 turnovers was the one blemish. Portland did a really good job of pressuring him full court, blitzing him, trapping him, and just making him see multiple bodies. Again, given who was available for the Lakers and who wasn't available for the Lakers, and just Portland's defensive capabilities, this also being the second night of a back-to-back after Austin just played 40 minutes and dropped a nearly 51-point triple-double, it's understandable that he was going to be fatigued. And in my opinion, there were some signs of fatigue from Austin and some struggles related to that, but he still dropped 41 points. He still was the primary reason this was even a game for most of the evening, right? Like LA lost all 4 quarters, but it was relatively close. Like Portland would kind of get ahead by in the beginning, kind of, 4, 6, 8 points. Then LA would make a little run, and there's a bunch of little mini runs, but Portland in general was kind of leading like 8 to 12 points for a lot of the game, and then ended up winning by 14. But back-to-back game, 40-point games for Austin, the third 40-point game of his career. His point totals now, the 4 games he's played this year with no Luka, no LeBron, he has gone for 37-plus points in those 4 games, 37, 45, 41, 51. That is just ridiculous. And again, just shows his ability to scale up and assume more usage when one or both stars are out. And I think he continues to make his case for being the best number 3 player in the league. He's, I think, making an early bid for a back end all-star spot. Of course, I would assume that once LeBron returns, the Lakers' primary candidates will be Luka and LeBron. But depending on how long LeBron is out and how that potentially affects things with him and his production, like Austin does have a shot to be an all-star this season if he can keep this up. I mean, his averages up to this point are just absolutely ridiculous. He came into this game averaging almost a 34-point triple-double, actually almost a 35-point triple-double, and then having 41, 4, and 5. Did have the 8 turnovers, but partly made up for it with 3 steals, took a charge. Like he was doing just about everything for LA. And I will note, like it's crazy to say because there was a 10-point difference. I'm almost more impressed with this performance than the Sacramento performance, because Sacramento to me is a bottom 5 defense in the league. They are, I've been very critical of their roster going back to the offseason. I don't know what they're doing. They have this weird collection of, former like veteran all-stars who are still effective offensive players, but don't play defense. The pieces don't fit together. And they're also kind of stymieing the young talent that they have on the roster in terms of just role and opportunity. So I don't get what Sacramento's doing. And not to take away from anything he did last night, but it's one thing to do that with Domantas Sabonis as the rim protector, or Dennis Schroeder, or even Keon Ellis as like the primary guys on him. It's another thing when you're being hounded by Toumani Camara, an all defense guy, one of the best perimeter defenders, like I would say a top 5 perimeter defender in the NBA, is hounding you for nearly 40 minutes up and down the floor. Then it's like, oh, you get a switch, like you're passed off to Drew Holiday, one of the all-time best perimeter defenders just in NBA history. And then if you get into the trees, you are going up against a 7'3", 7'4" Donovan Clingan, who is just a tree out, a literal like oak tree out there, who just sticks his arm up and is basically at the rim. And Austin had several nice finishes over him, but also, stop and pop, the little pull-ups, little, mid fadeaways. So I think Austin just continues to ascend. One little fun note here, his point total through the first 4 games, I believe it's 163 or 162, is tied with Elgin Baylor for the 3rd most points scored by a Laker through the first 4 games of a season. It also continues this trend of now the Lakers have had at least one player go for 40 in each of their first 4 games. So I think Austin has ascended. He has evolved. He has gotten better each season of his career. And yes, tonight, some of the sloppiness with the turnovers, like I think you have to live with a little bit of that based on how much was on his plate and the caliber of defense he was going up against. But that aside, it's hard to nitpick a guy who dropped 41, was the only consistent form of offense. A lot of DeAndre Ayton's stuff came in 2-man game with Austin, but also with the attention that Austin was drawing with Rui and Vando. It was a lot of benefiting off of that attention and them blitzing and doubling Austin and then playing on 4-on-3, 3-on-2 advantages. So even like the 5 assists, if you count like hockey assists or actually just like gravity that led to breakdowns in Portland's defense, a big part of that was Austin and the way that they had to defend him. So I think, again, based on the caliber of defense, 51 versus like a bottom 5 defense versus 41 second night of a back-to-back against probably a top 10 defense. They were the 6th best defense over the final like 40 something games of last season. I think that's arguably just as impressive, if not more. So I thought that was the bright spot for LA. Like obviously they lost the game. It was unfortunate. There's not much you could do with just having a scheduled back-to-back against like a young, hungry, tenacious defense, and you're missing half of your rotation, including your 2 best players. Like most teams are going to lose that game. It's understandable to a degree. In terms of notable performers, I mentioned Austin, of course, but just talk through him. DeAndre Ayton, 16 points, 8 rebounds, had a hot start offensively, then kind of cooled off the rest of the game, struggled a bit with foul trouble. I will note that, in my opinion, this was his worst defensive performance of the 4 games so far. I think the only one that was close was probably the Golden State game, although rewatching that one on film, I thought he held up better than I thought in the moment. This one, though, I thought Donovan Clingan, 7 offensive rebounds. Some of that did come against the bench units, but at least 3 or 4 of those, if not maybe 5, came directly against Ayton or in the vicinity of Ayton. I thought Clingan won that matchup tonight. And I also thought in general, the Lakers defensive rebounding and rim protection was subpar to non-existent for most of the night. And part of that was personnel based, but even with that starting group on paper, that should be a group that's defending a bit better. You have Austin, Laravia, Vando, Rui. So you have switchability there, 2 through 4. You have Ayton in there. So like based on at least the Lakers options, that should have been a better defensive group. But that was not the case tonight. They really struggled in those starter minutes overall. So Ayton, like the 2-man game with Austin continues to develop. And I think that's been one of the silver linings here without Luka has been Ayton and Austin are starting to figure out how to play together better. But I thought tonight was not as much of a high motor game for Ayton in terms, like, especially compared to last night. And I thought there was too many plays where he was just kind of a step slow on a rotation. Maybe that's him playing a back-to-back, like, first back-to-back of the season. I don't know, but I was a little disappointed with his defense tonight. Then Rui, 16 points, 6 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 block, 6 of 12 shooting, 2 for 5 on threes. I'd like to see him get a little bit more involved offensively. He was more involved offensively technically compared to last night, took a couple more shots, but it did feel like there were stretches of the game where he just wasn't getting the ball or wasn't looking to create. And I think especially with who's out right now, Rui's a natural guy to step up in that regard. Vando, 14 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals. Really impressive defensive game for Vando. I thought this was arguably his best defensive performance of the regular season so far. He just was everywhere, and it started to get to the point where Portland was really factoring in where Vando was defensively with what they were running and who they were trying to attack. And it became like, how can we avoid where Vando is? I thought that was notable. And the 14 points for him, like he did airball another 3-pointer, which I recommended him to stop taking them last night. Didn't listen. And another air ball, but he had several nice finishes, putbacks and cuts and transition plays. And so, again, it's going to be a mixed bag with him on like the positive side offensively. But I thought tonight was also probably his best overall game of the regular season, I would say. And again, it's only 4 games. Jake LaRavia really struggled offensively from the perspective of 1 for 6, 0 for 3 on threes, but did have 6 rebounds, 5 assists, continues to do a little bit of everything. Interestingly, though, the Lakers were minus 27 in his 29 minutes, which was by far the worst mark of the starters and also just by far the worst mark of anybody. So there was some stuff where he was kind of on the floor at the wrong times where they just went on these big runs when he was out there. I don't attribute that specifically to him, but he's another guy that you would like to see more of or more from rather offensively, especially when the Lakers are depleted. And then Dalton Connect, it was a tale of 2 halves. 0 points in the first half, 0 points in the first half for the entire Lakers bench, but 16 in the second half for Dalton, including, I would say, 13 in like the competitive portion of the game. He did hit a 3 late. So I would say he had like 13 there between the mid third to late fourth and started to get into a bit of a rhythm, got to the free throw line a couple times, hit a couple threes and had a nice a couple finishes around the basket, hit a little midi. So a couple steals, a block. Like I still would like to see more from Dalton overall. And I thought that first half was particularly discouraging, and it was just a continuation of a lot of the struggles we saw. But maybe this is a breakthrough moment for him. Maybe he can get on the other side of whatever mental stuff he's been dealing with, or just whatever struggles he's been dealing with that have been apparent, really going back to the end of last season, continuing through summer league, and then the preseason and the start of the season. Maybe him seeing the ball go in a little bit will do dividends for, or pay dividends for him. I think would still like to see him contribute a little bit more in other ways. Like he did have a couple steals, did have a block. So I don't think the defense was good tonight by any means. They still were targeting him and able to create separation against him off the dribble, but it was better. Like this was I would say a small step in the right direction for Dalton. Like I still have higher expectations for him. I feel like 5 for 13, like 2 for 8 on threes. I would we've seen more from him before, so we know he's capable of more. But I think based on how much he has struggled up to this point, it is a positive to see the ball go through the net for Dalton. Then really not much else to talk about with the rest of the bench. Scored 2 points, 1 for 7 shooting, some really rough turnovers from Bronny and Nick Smith, some really rough defensive possessions, fouls. It was just that was, just not like I thought. We retired the Dalton, Bronny, Nick Smith Jr. minutes in the preseason, and unfortunately for the Lakers, they had to bring it back, and it was just as bad in the preseason, or it was just as bad tonight as it was in the preseason. Stat of the night for me is going to have to be. I'll pick your poison here. You could either go with Portland's 19 offensive rebounds. They were just killing LA on the offensive glass. And it wasn't just Klingon who had 7, but it was their perimeter players who were just quicker to the ball. They won a bunch of those 50-50 balls around the free throw line. So looking at it, Kamara had 3, Avdia had 1, Sharp had 2, Chris Murray had 3, Jeremy Grant had 1. So like they were just killing LA and winning their head-to-head matchups in terms of loose balls, and Lakers had 12 themselves. So like they did, and that was largely Ayton had 5, Vando had 4. So those guys in particular really carried LA's offensive rebounding, and they were able to punish Portland smalls when Klingon was, or Hanson Yang was, drawn out of the play. But LA got slaughtered on the glass, and then they also had 25 turnovers, which led to 28 points for the Blazers. So that to me, like Portland had their own turnover issues. They had 19 turnovers that actually led to 30 points. So LA capitalized more. LA also won the fast break battle 19-9. But I thought the rebounding and Portland took 17 more shots than the Lakers, and LA actually shot better. But when you are allowing 17 more shots on your basket, and you're allowing 7 more made field goals, like that's going to be the difference in the game, including also the 3-point line. So I thought the rebounding, the turnovers, and the threes were ultimately what swung this game in Portland's favor. Now, as for takeaway number 1, this one I'm going to be quick because I've kind of touched on it already, but I think, in my opinion, the biggest silver lining outside of like Austin just breaking out to I think a different tier and really just cementing that he is the best number 3 option in the league and can assume that number 2 spot or even number 1 spot when Luka and LeBron are in and out of the lineup, has been the Austin DeAndre Ayton 2-man game and the strides that has taken. And really I'm factoring in last night as well, but their rhythm in the 2-man game and Austin hitting him in the pocket, I think has been really encouraging. And it's night and day to where it was in the preseason, or even I would say like the Golden State game to start the regular season. So as there's only so much we could take away from a night like this, back to back, only 5 rotation players available. Even last night, 7 rotation guys available, 2 of them get injured. The Lakers are kind of Frankensteining these lineups and these game plans together, and they're doing the best they can, but there are limitations to how much we could actually extrapolate other than maybe some of the individual performances, but like the lineup data and some of the stuff is a little tough to glean much from. However, I think the Austin Ayton 2-man game is something that moving forward can be a bread and butter for some of these second unit groupings. You could still see it with the starters, but I think as we start to look at what lineups make sense as Luka comes back, as LeBron comes back, I think the Lakers need to have second unit groupings with Austin and Ayton. And I think that pairing has started to develop some real chemistry. And then Luka and Jackson, because we know Luka loves having a lob threat. We know the chemistry that Luka and Jackson have, and that's like Luka's a better lob thrower than Austin. I think he and Jackson have better chemistry than Austin and Jackson have. So I think now that Austin and DeAndre have been able to get some reps together, I think that should be the bread and butter of those second unit groupings. And then Luka and Jackson should be the bread and butter of those second unit groupings. So I think there's kind of a couple natural pairings there that like Ayton probably could have gone either way depending on the way that things were trending. But I think now that we've seen a larger sample size of Austin and DeAndre together, I think there is something with their pace that is in sync right now. And I think that the pocket passing and Ayton's ability to hit those floaters and those middies from 10 to 15 feet is a really valuable thing with Austin, because Austin is also a mid-range assassin. So those two just dominating the middle of the floor, I think that's a more natural pairing. And then you give Luka the ultimate lob threat in Jackson, which is like, that's his best NBA skill. And those two are in sync with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think that's been like my biggest, probably like two player takeaway from this a couple of games has just been, I like Austin and DeAndre and what they are starting to develop together. And I think that as they play together throughout the rest of the week, it's only going to get better. And they're going to now face Minnesota, and then they got Memphis, and like different types of defenses, different types of defenders. And I think this is something that long-term can be a positive for LA. Then number two, second takeaway, we have a couple of injury updates. So ESPN reported that LeBron James is likely going to miss at least 3 weeks from this point, going to be trying to target a return around the 3-week mark, which would be somewhere around November 17th. So pulling up the Lakers schedule here, like November 17th is directly 3 weeks from today, which would be after that 5-game road trip that the Lakers have at Atlanta, at Charlotte, at OKC, at New Orleans, at Milwaukee. They come back to play Utah, then they go at Utah, then come back to play the Clippers, which takes us into Thanksgiving week. So it sounds like, based on that reporting, LeBron is likely going to be back sometime in that week leading into Thanksgiving in the second half of November. So that'll be another 10 to 12 games or so for LA to survive, including a really tough road trip, again, at Atlanta, at Charlotte, who's playing well, at OKC, at New Orleans, at Milwaukee. Like, none of those are gimme games necessarily. I think they should beat Charlotte and New Orleans. And then Atlanta, OKC, and Milwaukee will be tough. But, definitely just good to know, kind of have a better idea of when LeBron is going to come back. And the other update was Gabe Vincent is going to miss between 2 to 4 weeks with this ankle injury that he suffered against Sacramento. And I think of note here, like, most of the time, Lakers players do not beat their injury timeline. So certainly a chance Gabe Vincent is back within a couple weeks, but he left the arena last night in a boot. He arrived to the arena tonight on crutches. It feels like 2 weeks is pretty optimistic, especially with how LA has handled injuries over the last 2 years, but also just in general. Like, we have this growing sample size of Lakers players rarely are on like the short side of their timetable to return. Maybe if it's like a multi-day thing of like a guy's day to day, they're going to miss like a game or two. That's like an exception. But anytime there's a multi-week absence, guys usually are on the long side of that projected timeline or even beyond it. So I would expect Gabe Vincent to, similar to LeBron, probably be out at least 3 weeks, if not going on 4, which then puts him into that Thanksgiving range. And for as much as Gabe has, I would say, underperformed relative to his performance in the preseason, and I know with fans, he's probably been the most frustrating player up to this point, it still is a loss for LA. Like, I thought he should have been moved to the bench and been more in like a 18, 20 minute a night role rather than playing high 20s as a starter. But we saw tonight, there's a big difference between Gabe Vincent being out there and Nick Smith Jr. being out there, or Bronny James being out there. So like, for as much as the shot selection and the missing the open threes and him being, defending Ant and Jimmy and some of these guys that he should not be defending can frustrate and can ultimately like feel like a negative, Gabe Vincent is better than the alternatives at the back end of the roster, and LA is going to miss him. And that's also, like, I haven't even really mentioned that Marcus Smart was out tonight. So I remember I noted last night, I was a little concerned he was potentially going to miss some time because of the nature of the injury that he suffered in the fourth quarter. He went back toward the locker room, was on the bike, did return for the final 32 seconds, but I was a little nervous with that. He ended up missing tonight, and there's no update on him and his availability. So with a quick turnaround here, less than 48 hours till they play in Minnesota on Wednesday, you have to wonder if Marcus Smart is going to be available for that game, and then they play Memphis and then they come back and they have a back-to-back. So like this is an unforgiving week for LA in terms of the schedule, and 3 of their 4 next games are on the road. And they come back, then they go back out on that 5-game trip. So it's going to be a tough stretch coming up here for LA. But wanted to just share my thoughts on the injury update. Like in the time, like I guess the one thing with the Gabe injury that I think is a silver lining is this does remove him from the starting lineup. They will have to form a new starting lineup until LeBron returns. And I think that should be ideally Marcus Smart. Now, if Marcus is injured, it probably becomes Jake LaRavia. I still don't think it becomes Jared Vanderbilt based on he's been like the backup 5 behind DeAndre. So I think JJ will keep him off the bench. It'll either be Jake LaRavia or Marcus Smart. If Marcus is available, I think it'll be him, as we saw in the Sacramento game. But if he's out, then it's next man up, Jake LaRavia. And then takeaway number 3, I wanted to touch on the end of the bench guys, because I think we've gotten some clarity now. Like this was a big opportunity for all 5 of the guys who came off the bench. Christian Coloco and Chris Magnon both got short shifts in the first half. Coloco played 2 minutes, Magnon played 3. Then they came back in for garbage time. Magnon, I think he's played 7 minutes across 2 games. It's hard for me to draw too many conclusions. I do like the defensive profile. We've only seen him take 1 shot. It was a badly missed 3. I want to see more from him for me to like have better takeaways for him. Coloco, I thought JJ had a pretty quick hook with him in the first half, and I didn't necessarily agree with it, but it is what it is. Like he didn't have like a good performance for sure. I already touched on Dalton. I thought it was pretty up and down. Like I thought it was an awful first half and an above average second half. Like, he did shake loose obviously for 16 all in the second half and a couple steals and a block. So like, I do want to give him his acknowledgement and his credit. I do think though, at the same time, like he's getting some pretty good looks that he's not converting on. And it's a growing sample size of him not converting and then kind of almost trying to shoot his way out of it. And sometimes I feel like just taking some questionable shots. And then like the turnover he had to Austin was just like an egregious, just not really thinking through the play. I don't know. Like, again, this was his best performance. And I do think the second half, there were some encouraging signs of life from him. Like he did not give up. There was a level of resolve that was overall, I would say, positive. But I think based on like his age, where he's at in his career, what he showed last season, I think this could have been an opportunity for him to, I just think, have a better performance and show the coaching staff he's ready for a rotation role. And I don't think he looks like a rotation player currently. I think he looks like a fringe rotation player, which is fine. But with how many bodies the Lakers are down, he kind of has to play in the rotation. And maybe that's a net positive overall down the road. He continues to play better. But right now, I would say he's had like 3 pretty bad games and 1 like slightly maybe above average game if we want to be generous tonight. So and then Nick Smith and Bronny James. Nick Smith, obviously a 2-way guy, so it's a little bit different expectations, though he is a former first-round pick, just removed by a couple of years. He had the one little floater in the lane, but some of the stuff with the decision-making, the turnovers, the defense, the fouls, I don't think he's ready for a rotation role. And then same thing with Bronny. He's just really struggled. And it's kind of interesting because I thought he looked better in the second half of last season in the regular season. And a lot of that was garbage time. Some of it was like late in the season. They're depleted. They're resting guys, or remember there was a stretch where they had like 4 or 5 guys out. So Bronny had to play. Dalton played in that game. He had the Denver game, right? But Bronny just, I don't know what it's been, but he has really struggled with bringing the ball up against ball pressure, making decisions out of that. I think the defense, the fouls, he's had some really bad turnovers. So he's still very much a work in progress. And I think pretty far from being a rotation guy, despite I thought there were positives at the end of last season, the G League season, Summer League, and it's just not translated into the preseason or the start of this season. So I think at this point, I would say I feel comfortable with 10 of the Lakers' 14 players. in terms of like the official roster guys. I do not currently feel comfortable with Dalton, Maxey, Adu, or Bronny. Adu has more to do with we just haven't seen him, and he's now been dealing with this knee recovery and rehab for on and off for like 7 months. So that's a long time for a guy to eventually return and potentially make an impact. But the other guys like Maxey had a rough shift in the preseason, and he's been in and out with injuries. And then I just don't think we've seen enough from Dalton and Bronny to be guys I would feel comfortable throwing in like big minutes against like a good team. Like that's my barometer for, I think the Lakers have 10 of those guys, but it falls off a cliff in my opinion at player 11, who's probably Dalton. But with all that said, let's get into the Q&A here. See, we got a couple super chats. Kenneth, thank you for the super chats. People expect the unexpected. We are missing more than half the rotation. Hope we get everybody soon. Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody should have expected a win. And you guys know I'm not a gambling person. I'm not a betting person, but I will sometimes just check the lines out of curiosity to see what the expectation is for a game, right? And entering this game, Portland was 1.5 point favorites. And then if you apply the, I don't know if it still applies because again, I'm not really tapped into like the gambling space, but I believe that at least with basketball, the thinking is like the home team gets kind of automatically like 3 points. So if you're saying Portland's a 1.5 point favorite, that's really like if it was a neutral court, they'd be 4.5 point favorites, but the Lakers already are kind of starting with 3 points as the home team. So like Vegas viewed it as Portland being the favorite. I viewed it entering this game as Portland being the favorite. They have a pretty impressive start to the season, despite dealing with all the Chauncey Billups stuff, but they had a close loss to the Timberwolves. They beat the Blazers by 20, close loss to the Clippers, and then just beat the Lakers. So that's a really tough schedule. That's 4 teams I expect to be in the playoffs, and they beat 2 of them, and they lost in close games to 2 of them. So Portland is looking like a real play-in contender. Like the offense, you're not going to have every night where Jrue Holiday's going 4 for 7 on threes. Jeremy Grant's going 3 for 7, doing his best impression to try and get traded to the Lakers. Like you're not going to have that every night. And I think the offense is a real work in progress for them. Obviously Scoot's out, but I think they're a really interesting young team. And yeah, so I don't think there's any shame in LA losing in the manner that they did. Like I think Austin was the best player on the floor. After that, you can make a case that Portland had 2 or 3, like Avdija is the second best player. And then tonight, at least you can make a case Jrue Holiday and Jeremy Grant were better than anyone else on the Lakers. And it's like, that's just the reality of the situation with Luka and LeBron being out. Oot to the Wee. Thank you for the super chat. Rui got to go tonight. He was okay. Very forgettable. I mean, it's interesting because Rui's now last couple games, he's averaging 17 points a game, 4.5 rebounds, 1.5 assists, half a block, 1 steal. So you'd like to, I mean, I've already harped on the rebounding. You'd like to see more from him on the glass. That's just not like tonight. I will say he had 6, right? But he was a part of the giving up offensive rebounds. He lost guys. He continues to lose guys off the ball. Like I've liked with Rui. I think one skill he's developed well is when guys are driving, he will lunge and like try to reach at the ball, poke it loose, strip it, whatever. And that's become like an effective part of his off ball defense where because Rui's actually like longer, I believe his wingspan's around like 7 feet, 7'1", something like that. So like he's got a longer wingspan than you would think based on his frame. And I think that's one way that he uses it well. 7'2", excuse me. I was off by a little bit there. So 7'2" wingspan for a 6'8" player. That's a pretty long wingspan. And I think Rui can use that well as a help defender, lunging and just kind of being a little bit of a pest on like a drive. But his off ball awareness in terms of losing guys in between like the wing and the corner, it's just, it's problematic. And that's to say nothing of his on ball defense where he was the primary guy on Avdija and Avdija cooked him tonight. So, Vando got some Avdija times, but with how much they switched, they were trying to get Rui switched onto him. And I thought Rui lost that matchup. So I'm not at the point where Rui's got to go. I think that the bigger thing with Rui is as I've discussed before, I think Rui is in a tough position as a starter on this team. And I don't think this is the roster makeup to have him thrive as a starter. I think he, based on the Lakers personnel, should be a bench. It's fine if he's like their sixth man, but he should be more of a bench player, in my opinion. Obviously, right now with who's out, he has to start and play a lot. But I think when this team's at full strength, he makes a lot more sense off the bench. Jay Hoodie, thank you for the super chat. Maybe I need to rewatch the game, but I don't think Bronny was that bad, especially defensively. Jake LaRavia was awful. He's probably the worst ball handler on the team and passed up threes. Shout out AR. Bronny, he did have some good defensive moments, and looking at the number, I think he had he had one steal, one block. They were I think actually the Bronny stuff is more offensive than defensive. I thought like the three fouls, he does have a propensity for either teams will pick on him because he's smaller. Like he's honestly probably smaller than Gabe Vincent. So just to kind of have that size perspective of thinking about teams going at Gabe and some of the limitations Gabe has, like it's similar with Bronny. And I thought, like to my recollection, right, and I'm like I took notes and stuff, but I've not rewatched the game, so maybe upon a rewatch, you're referencing a rewatch for yourself too. Like maybe I'll have a different perspective. In the moment, it does not feel like it's one thing if you're picking up full court and being a nuisance and you're being like a Davion Mitchell and you're picking up these ball pressure fouls. Those are good fouls, but I felt a lot of his fouls were like he got beat or he's getting targeted, and then he's kind of forced to foul, or he's picking up a foul that he doesn't feel like he picked up for whatever reason. So, I don't want to harp too much on the fouls because I think they're like I thought the turnovers. I think the turnovers and the inability to be a primary ball handler against ball pressures is more so his biggest thing, and he's not a good enough shooter then. Like you need to have it. I guess my point is I don't really know what his NBA skill is offensively right now because it's not his ball handling, it's not his playmaking, it's not his shot making, and it's not his shooting. So I don't know where the offensive skill is. That is in terms of like every guy has like, if you're a role player, you have like the one skill that gets you on the floor, right? Like even Dalton in theory is supposed to be this like knockdown shooter that he has not been consistently, and that's ultimately why he can't really get on the floor. I think with Bronny, we're still trying to figure out like what that skill in particular is. And it seems like LA's trying to groom him to be a primary ball handler. I just don't think those minutes have looked good against real NBA competition. And then defensively, I think he's improved, but he's still not like he was billed as this lockdown Avery Bradley, Davion Mitchell, Pat Beverly type. And I've not seen that level of tenacity from him and like that level of ball pressure. And I just have not seen like that type of defender or defensive profile yet. So I still think he's figuring out like what is the thing that he does that gets him on the floor other than just a bunch of injuries, right? And we don't really have an answer for that. So I don't know, maybe I'm being too harsh on him. You guys can let me know in the chat here, but I thought it was not a good showing from him. Danica, 4 games in, thoughts on JJ's coaching / schemes. I think JJ, so I'll say, I thought the Golden State game plan was disappointing, and like the starting Gabe and then switching as much as they did, or passive switching as much as they did, soft switching, whatever you want to call it, and them allowing them to pick on certain matchups as much as they did. Like I think that's been a blind spot for JJ since he has become a coach. Is I think he's too okay with the opponent dictating the terms of engagement offensively and hammering certain mismatches. And I think if he was here, he would probably defend that and be like, well, it's getting them out of rhythm. They're ISOing or posting up, and now it's easier to send help and rotate out of that. Or if we don't want to be aggressive and send help, like we'll live with them draining the clock, trying to get the ball to a certain player, and that player taking like a contested shot. I think the issue is when it's like a 6'2" Gabe Vincent, they're going to eat more often than not. And we've just seen that now for an extended period going back to last season. But I think the offense, so coming into tonight, and this is something I wanted to touch on, so this leads me into that. The Lakers were third in offense, and 18th in defense. And I thought that was a pretty realistic snapshot of like this team's realistic potential. Like I've been saying since the offseason, since we saw this roster, I think this should be a top 10 offense easily, probably a top 5 to top 3 offense with the upside to be the best offense in the league. Like obviously there's so many factors that go into that, including health, that I don't want to just say they're automatically like the best offense in the league, and I don't think they quite have the shooting that some of the other best offenses have. That's maybe like a limiting factor, but they should be a top 5 offense. And so far they have been. The defense is where obviously that's going to determine LA's floor and ceiling. Up to this point, they've been 18th. After tonight, they are 18th in defense still, but the offense dropped to 11th. So tonight really hurt their offense. And I believe as a group, they had a 101.8 offensive rating, which is awful. But again, like that's to be expected with who is available. So in terms of the coaching and schemes, I think he's largely pushed the right buttons. I don't agree with Gabe starting, as I've made clear here. I think it's been the Vando at the 5 minutes have actually been, I think, like largely solid, all things considered. You know, once Jackson went out, he's pushed the right buttons with Luka and Austin and spamming certain actions. I think that's been a positive. And Kranjis, who tracks all of the offensive stuff, has been hammering like the offensive organization rate is trending up. The Lakers are running the right sets against different coverages, and they're cooking drop, they're cooking switches. They're doing well against hedges. And I think blitzes are the one area that they haven't quite done well against, but teams are only going to blitz selectively. You're not going to blitz for an entire game. So I think LA offensively, I've liked a lot of it, what we've seen. I think defensively, and I will say they've been a little bit more selective with the switching here the last couple games, but I do think they got to scale it back a little bit because I don't think they have the personnel to switch as much as they do. We've obviously seen with Ayton, they've been more selective. Like they're running a lot of drop, but I more so think with some of the other guys, they passively switch a little bit too easily. But overall, I would give him probably a B, maybe B plus for the first 4 games. Like certainly some areas to clean up. I think more so honestly in the rotation in certain lineups, but given how many guys have been in and out, it's hard to really critique that. We've only seen it for a couple games. They went 1-1 and Luka was awesome. So I'm not, we have such a small sample size at this point. Like it's hard to take much away from the last couple of games. Braden, thank you for the super chat. I'd much rather the injury bug hit us now than later on in the season. I really hope Rob cooks up a trade like the DFS one this season. That's a good point. The natural counterpoint I will point out is like, unfortunately for the Lakers, this has been a trend where they have the injury bug early in the season and in the middle of the season and late in the season. Although I think in general, like late in the season has been a little bit better in recent years. Although go back to last postseason, LeBron got hurt, Austin got hurt, Luka had the stomach situation. So they've just dealt with a lot of injuries. I said this a couple streams ago, like for whatever reason, them, Memphis, New Orleans, Miami, those are some of the teams that come to mind in terms of teams that are often dealing with a lot of injuries over the last few years. I don't know what it is. I think it's largely just bad luck for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, I think the optimistic look, though, to your point, is like hopefully they're getting this out of their system now and guys can rest up and be healthy. I think, though, my concern is like once you have something like, especially with how many guys are out, I think they just got to be careful with guys rushing back, because the fear would then be a guy rushes back because they feel like they need to come back earlier than expected or earlier than is not required, but suggested. And then they re-aggravate something and have a more serious injury. Because right now, none of these injuries are supposed to be like that serious. Like I guess Gabe is the closest, right? And LeBron obviously missing as much time as he has with sciatica. But outside of those two, all the injuries tentatively are supposed to be like short term, but you want to be careful that that doesn't develop into something long term. So, but to your second point, yeah, I mean, I think the DFS trade is going to be an interesting one. They don't have 3 seconds to trade. They only have 1 second. So, but can you do something with the expirings and potentially a first round pick or multiple pick swaps. 1 second, we shall see. But yeah, I think we're at least a couple months away from them making a move. Ooh, to the we, TBH, Jake didn't look bad. Passive, yes, but was okay. Yeah, I guess I didn't realize, or I didn't respond to the rest of Jay Hoodie's comment here where he said Laravia was awful, probably the worst ball handler on the team and passed up threes. I think a real thing with Jake has been being a little bit too passive. I did mention he had the worst plus minus tonight. Like 5 assists to 1 turnover is pretty good. So that's where like I think his decision making from a shot or more so from like a passing perspective. I've mentioned before, he's a connector. He's a connecting piece. I think that's a good thing. We've seen that from him, but the shot has not quite been there. And looking at his game logs here, 2 for 4, 2 for 3, 3 for 10, 1 for 6. So first couple games, he was 4 for 7, which like the volume is too low, especially he played 44 minutes. You'd like to see more than 7 shots in 44 minutes. But the last couple games, he's 4 for 16. So he's been more aggressive, but the shot has not fallen. And that brings us back to the preseason where he was 3 for 6, 5 for 10, 4 for 13, 2 for 7, 0 for 2. So he has not shot the ball well as a Laker, especially compared to how he shot in Memphis and Sacramento. But I do think he serves a valuable role as a connecting piece and a guy who can just keep the ball moving and humming, because this can be a group that, I mean, they don't have guys that do that necessarily. Some of these other role players on the team, like I think he does that at a much higher level, say, than Rui or Vando, for example. And that's reflected in his assists, although obviously assists aren't everything. But yeah, I think Jake's still figuring out his role. Connor Phillips, Jovan, do you have a ballpark number of how many DK trades the Lakers turned down or had the potential to offer last season? And how many of those do you think they would accept now with hindsight? I don't. I mean, I've reported on here before that they were offering the Mark Williams package for multiple centers last year, and Utah turned it down for Kessler. Detroit turned it down for Jalen Duren. So I've more so heard trades that Dalton was in. I don't know that Dalton was ever a guy that like teams were like maybe in the off season or going, or maybe like, of course, right after the 37-point game, I'm sure there was a lot of interest, but like, I don't think Dalton was some like super coveted guy last year that all these teams were calling about and asking for. Like, obviously, naturally you have trade conversations and then you start to talk through assets, and I'm sure he came up in those, but I don't have insight to like this team was like, we're going to give you this for Dalton. And I think it was more so like he would be someone the Lakers are packaging to try to get a better player rather than a team seeking out Dalton, if that makes sense, right? Like, I think teams viewed him as a positive asset at the time in terms of like the Lakers only had so many picks and pick swaps and stuff to offer. So once you get down the list of like top assets, Dalton's going to be near the top of that list. But I think it was more LA trying to see if they could package him for something better rather than teams seeking out Dalton, I guess what would be my read on that. I don't know. All I know is what I heard about the like trying to package him for other bigs, and that Mark Williams was not their first big on the list. But I would assume if there were opportunities that they did not strike on, that they probably like, I will know even at that time though, like they were still pretty high on Dalton, or like relatively high on Dalton. I think he had cooled off a little bit from like earlier in the season, but that was like right before he really started to struggle over the second half of the season in the play, I mean, just didn't play in the playoffs and then summer league and stuff. So I also think it was kind of a timing thing where if he had struggled a little bit more going into the trade deadline, one, I mean, I don't even know if he gets moved for Mark Williams, maybe that just never happens. But two, maybe they try to trade him, but his value is a little bit lower. So it was kind of like a weird timing thing. But I would assume if there were any trades that they turned down, they would regret that, because I think his value has taken a massive hit. Thomas, it's time to start talking to the Suns and see if they want a first and our two expirings in Gabe and Maxey. I think that's enough salary to match Brooks. Suns need draft capital. I think it's good to talk to the Suns. The thing I've noted before is that teams are always delusional to start the season, and Phoenix is 1-3, so I think that's a positive for LA and a positive for anyone who wants to try and poach Dylan Brooks from the Suns. But I think they're going to need to struggle a little bit more and it be a little bit clearer that they are a lottery team and not even a play-in team, which I think is their future. But I don't expect if a Brooks trade happens, I would assume it doesn't happen until at least December, if not closer to the trade deadline. So I think we're still a little bit a ways from there. Sean Parker, Jovan, how do you think Rui can get involved more? It's a good question. I mean, right now the Lakers have been spamming the Ayton pick and roll and two-man game, and I think they've gotten a lot of good results out of that. The thing I've noted with Rui continually and tried to harp on it more the last few streams has just been Rui is more a finisher than a creator. And so he's going to benefit off of ball movement. He's going to benefit off of, like, if you think about the primary ways that Rui scores, it's like a ping, it's pick and roll action and the big hits Rui cutting from the corner, or maybe it's even a two-man action with Austin and Luka, Austin and LeBron, and whoever's the roller hits Rui on a kick out pass on the weak side corner, or again, like with the cutting. And so if you think about the three most consistent ways Rui scores, or at least in my opinion, the three most consistent ways, it's off of a baseline cut. It's as, some sort of kick out pass or swing pass, and he takes a weak side, wing or corner three, or it's out in transition where he is athletic and is a good finisher out in transition, either with someone, hit ahead, or it's like a 2-on-1 situation and they pass to him and he dunks the ball, gets fouled, whatever. So those are all three of those ways. Like, yes, Rui's involved to some extent with the creating, like maybe off the ball, he's relocating or he's cutting at the right time or he's getting out in transition at the right time, but they're not Rui creating off the dribble. And that's where there are some limitations with Rui's game of, he can come off pin downs, he can come off post ups or whatever, maybe take like a little dribble. And he had a nice play in tonight where he had like the little shoulder kind of push up, or not push up, but initiated with the shoulder, like shoulder bump into a fadeaway. And he's good at that, like little fadeaway midi, but he's not really a guy who's going to create his own shot or take like, 5 dribbles and do some like intricate dribbling move. And so I think that does limit his shot profile to somewhat being dependent on playmakers setting up for him, which right now the Lakers only have one truly reliable playmaker in Austin available, and or like ball movement, which the Lakers did have some solid ball movement tonight. And that's where we did see Rui get some of the opportunities. But I mean, technically he was fourth on the team in shots taken. It was Austin 1, Ayton 2, Dalton 3, Rui 4. I do think he needs a little bit more Dalton in him in terms of just like letting it fly. And in general, I think Rui takes pretty good shots. He's not a guy who's going to force things. So sometimes if you think about it in like 2K or something, right, you want to up the slider for Rui in terms of like aggression or just calling his own number. But I think that's also a more realistic way for him to play, right? Because if he does that, it can sometimes, like, you want him doing that when Luka and LeBron are out. You don't want him doing that when those guys are back, right? Because then he's more the fourth or fifth option depending on the lineup. So I think they certainly can try to find, like, there was not, to my recollection, as many like deep seal post ups from him tonight and trying to target mismatches. With Portland, they don't have a lot of mismatches. They're just a really good, big, long defensive team that, I like Rui on Jrue Holiday is not a mismatch. That's just not. So I think part of it was the personnel tonight, but in general, I think he could be a little bit more assertive. Sometimes he can like struggle with processing the game and seeing the floor and stuff. And maybe that, like tonight, 3 turnovers compared to just 1 assist. That can sometimes be a processing issue from him, but I think he's been fine on offense. I think more so defense and rebounding are the bigger issues. Thomas, I like the go screens from Rui, Vando, and that they are fed in the mid post. Rui hits shots comfortably in the mid post. Vando becomes a dribble handoff and off ball screen setter for movement shooters. Yeah, I liked Vando had the keeper action where he fakes the handoff and then takes it himself and drove. And he's been doing that a little bit more. I think I've liked Vando at the 5 a little bit more because the Lakers, he just works better when there's shooting around him and spacing. And that's the Vando quandary is like he's a 5 on offense, but he's more of a wing on or perimeter player on defense. So it's just like a weird, you kind of like you need then like really good team defense if you're going to play him at the 5 because you are lacking rim protection in that instance. But yeah, I mean, getting Rui more touches, like I'll say with JJ, I think he lives with the mid post stuff with Austin and Ayton. And I think that's probably the pecking order is like, well, of course, like Luka, Austin, Ayton, Rui in terms of the mid post stuff. LeBron, I guess, somewhere in there. So somewhere in between. Maybe it's Luka, LeBron, Austin, Ayton, Rui. But I do think Rui's a little bit lower in that pecking order, right? So he will get a couple of those a game, but I don't think they're going to feed him a lot of that because JJ doesn't want a lot of mid-range jumpers. Like he still wants shots at the rim, free throws, and threes. So I do think there's a little bit of a limitation there that maybe that plays into the previous question of like getting Rui more involved offensively. But he is pretty automatic in the mid post. Pub Chow 302, how does Mark Williams compare with Ayton? Good question. It's been a minute since I did my Mark Williams film breakdown and deep dive. Off the top of my head, I mean, Mark Williams is a bigger player, so I think there's an element of like, I think he just takes up more space on both sides of the ball. I think he's probably a better finisher around the basket than Ayton, but Ayton's certainly a better high volume pick and roll player, and like especially with like definitely better touch and range with Ayton in terms of like his floaters, his mid range game, the pick and pop. Short roll game. In terms of passing, I think they're pretty similar. Ayton's maybe a little bit better because he's been in more high leverage situations. Both can struggle a little bit though with like the assist to turnover ratio. In terms of rebounding, I would give Williams a slight edge, but I think they're relatively close. In terms of, I think like direct rim protection of just like being big around the basket and blocking shots or protecting the rim, Williams is better, but Ayton's better at defending in space. And we've seen Ayton switch on to guards. We've seen him corral in the pick and roll. And I think he does that at a higher level than Williams can. So Williams isn't as fluid and mobile as Ayton is. So I think like he's a little bit more of a traditional kind of behemoth big that has blossomed as a finisher in the pick and roll and like with little hook shots and stuff. Probably a little bit more sporadic than Ayton, if you can believe that. So I think Ayton's a better player, and I think he's a better fit. I think Williams is better and bigger around the basket specifically, but Ayton, I think you need to be able to go to different looks with your bigs, and I think Ayton's more versatile and dynamic in that regard. He's also more battle tested. He's more proven, finals run, multiple playoff appearances with Phoenix. So I would rather, especially looking at like the contract situation, I'd rather have Ayton. MJ, can Matisse Thybulle be that DFS trade for us cost-wise and player-wise? I think the challenge that I've continually referenced with Matisse Thybulle is he's making a little bit more than Gabe and Maxey. So unless Portland's really high on Dalton, like you could do something like Maxey and Dalton or Gabe and Dalton for Matisse Thybulle and maybe throw in like a second, but that's like about as much as you could do realistically. And I don't know that Portland necessarily does that. I should have noted he missed the game tonight, that they were without him as well as Scoot. So I just think it's like, looking at Portland's roster, Gabe Vincent doesn't really make sense and they're both expiring. So you save a little bit of money, although if you're taking on Dalton, you're actually adding longer term money and taking on more money this year. But it's like it's sort of like a chat. Like it'd be one thing if you had a couple years left and you could make the argument Portland gets off the money, but he's a better player than Gabe and Maxi Kleba, and he fits more with what Portland needs and their style of play. So I don't see like a Lakers future second being enough to offset the difference between Gabe and Thibault or Maxi and Thibault. Can Dalton plus a second offset it? Maybe, but even then, we've been talking for weeks now about how low Dalton's trade value is. So a first would do it, but I think a first is an egregious overpay, and I don't think the Lakers would do that. So, like, I think if you're giving up a first, you got to aim higher than Matisse Thybulle. So I think the Lakers are just in a weird asset spot where if they had a couple seconds, like remember with DFS, it was D'Lo plus 3 seconds, and the enticing part for Brooklyn was getting those 3 seconds. Lakers don't have 3 seconds to trade. Could you do a pick swap? But now you're getting into a spot where I think that's probably an overpay. So they're just kind of in a weird spot where 1 second's probably not enough, but then anything more, whether it's a pick swap, a first, or even potentially throwing in Dalton. I mean, maybe the Dalton one I'm okay with, but certainly not a first. And even a pick swap is probably a little bit too much in my opinion. MJ, when will Adu be reevaluated? He's supposed to be reevaluated soon. I believe it's this upcoming week. Just double checking the timeline here. He was set to be evaluated in 2 to 3 weeks on October 8th. So we are now October 27th. So that was 19 days ago. We are 2 days away from the 3-week mark. So I mean, he's supposed to be reevaluated this week, but I don't know if we'll get that update. We'll see. Telly Khalifa, thank you for the question. What's up? Hey, Jovan, sorry for tuning in late. Wondering if there's an update to Smart and his possible return. No update yet, at least to my knowledge. For those who are arriving late, I am not feeling well. I could not move or get out of bed today, so I did not attend the game. But I see here that there was an update post-game from JJ that he said Lakers are hopeful Marcus Smart and Jackson Hayes will both be back Wednesday. So that would be a welcomed addition for LA. Ken Carter, hey Jovan, I was curious, is part of the reason you joined the Lakers as a way to get back at the Clippers, and when they get eliminated, does your heart smile? Be honest. So I'll answer this a couple ways. No, not getting back at it had nothing to do because before I was talking about my last stream last night, I was talking about my whole situation with the Clippers and my report about the chemistry, and they were upset about it and all that stuff. No, like it was just I got asked by I actually let them know that season, my second season covering the Clippers, that if there ever was an opportunity to cover the Lakers, I would love to cover the Lakers. And it just so happened that during COVID, or like the beginning of COVID, like that summer, we had a round of layoffs, and there was a second person who was covering the Lakers, and they were laid off during that break from the season to the bubble. And so then the bubble resumed, and Lakers won the title, and they were like, we are understaffed with our Lakers coverage. Like, Jovan, would you be interested in switching over from covering the Clippers to the Lakers? And I thought about it for about 0.1 seconds, and I said yes. And just, growing up, as I mentioned before, a Lakers fan, but also just growing up in LA and knowing how much it's really like Lakers and Dodgers, 1A, 1B in whatever order you want to argue. I would even argue Lakers 1A, but I'm probably biased. But just knowing how much the Lakers mean to LA, and knowing that, I'm a native Angelino, I have no plans on ever leaving LA. I just knew like what that opportunity meant to cover the Lakers, and it was a no-brainer for me. So once I got offered the opportunity, I said yes, and I got switched over going into that following season. And when they get eliminated, does my heart smile? I'll say that there's no love lost from that side, right? And there's a lot of layers, a lot of context with all this stuff. So I'll just say there's no love lost. Michael D, thank you for the super chat. Would I do have played tonight? If so, how much? Interesting question. I think if he was available, yes, he would have played. How much? Looking at it, I mean, I think the starters probably end up playing similar minutes. I don't think he necessarily impacts that. I think he probably takes part of the Nick Smith and Bronny minutes and part of the Dalton minutes. So I think he's probably in the high teens to low 20s, somewhere in there. And then Dalton's probably a little bit lower, maybe down from like 25 closer to 20. And then Nick Smith and Bronny are both more like 10 to 15 rather than 20. So yeah, I think probably a little bit of like all those guys play a little bit less. Adu plays more. Colby S30, thank you for the super chat. Why do the Lakers always lie about the status of injuries? Is their medical staff just dumb, or are they lying intentionally? This is a tough question for me to answer. So I want to be careful with how I answer it here, because I think there's a false dichotomy here of saying they're either dumb or lying. I don't think it's necessarily either one. I think they are overly cautious, and I think in part because of some of the previous stuff we've gone through, the Gabe Vincents, the Kendrick Nunns, the Christian Woods, the Jackson Hayes, the Jared Vanderbilts, et cetera, et cetera. Because of that history, I think there is a sensitivity with the organization to being as accurate as possible with some of the stuff. So with injuries, they're often fluid situations that it's often about how a player recovers, and there is the return to play protocol that's extensive, and like there's all these check marks that they have to hit. And for whatever reason, I think the Lakers, more so previously rather than recently, would try to undersell, for whatever reason, the extent of the injury and try to like sell some optimism with it. And like, oh, this guy's going to be back in a couple of weeks, when like they really knew it was probably going to be longer. And that was like a very minuscule, like best case scenario that was unlikely to happen. So I think they become more cautious with how they frame it. And that's why there's like these extensive reevaluation periods, and they will kind of, keep pushing it out in the future. I think with every medical staff, there is an element of like, lying is a strong word, so I don't want to use that, but like there's always some gamesmanship too, right? Because sometimes you'll see a guy will be listed as questionable, will go from like available to questionable, and then they end up playing. And that's like, sometimes though, that'll mess with an opponent, right? Where they're trying to, like, I kind of thought there was an element of that with the Luka situation, where it was like Luka was fine to close the Minnesota game. Now he's listed as questionable. And now if you're Sacramento, that kind of throws off your preparation for that game. And then typically, like I thought Luka was going to play, then he ended up being ruled out, and obviously for a week. So I think it's, yeah, I mean, I don't think I'll say I don't think they've been fully transparent with the injuries over the last 2 years. Right. And that has maybe continued into this year, but I also think there's an element of caution and like sensitivity with this whole situation that has sometimes played into all this. See, Dodgers in the 17th now. That's wild. Miss Optimist, thank you for the super chat. I think Bronny lost confidence when he shot 1 for 12 in the preseason. He'll be fine. Thought he was solid on defense tonight. Jack's still fouling. Bronny's got time. Is that there's no other Jackson on the team, so that's a Jackson Hayes reference here. Yeah, I mean, maybe I was a little harsh on Bronny's defense. In general, like the Lakers didn't defend that well tonight, outside of like the starting groups didn't defend well, but like you could just tell there's a drop off from the starting players who are all like rotation to starting level players at the NBA level to the bench, which is largely G League and 2A type guys, if we're being honest. So I think there was like just some of those lineups really struggled to defend and had some rough plus minuses and some rough stretches. So maybe that has been in my head a little bit too much, but I will rewatch it and come back to you with my updated assessment of Bronny's defense. All right, going to go about 5 more minutes here. So if you guys got any more questions before we wrap. I like this from D8. I think there's value with Bronny. With Bronny. With Dalton bringing the ball up to give AR a break. I actually agree with you. And one thing that I've felt progressively with Dalton, the more we've seen him, is like, and if you go back to college, Dalton was actually more of a scorer than like this lights out shooter. Like that was part of his scoring package. But I think Dalton is more of a guy who, as we've talked about with Gabe, we've talked about it with Dalton, there are certain guys who I think need to touch the ball and have the ball to get into a certain rhythm or flow offensively. And they're not just like throw them out there and they're just automatic flamethrowers coming in cold. I think Dalton is a guy who needs to run a pick and roll or come off a pin down and go into another action and like just get into a little bit of a rhythm with touching the ball and like just kind of going through the motions first before because a lot of times, right, like with him, it's just he comes in. Honestly, more recently, like he just hasn't even been getting shots. He just is kind of out there as a floor spacer, but maybe he gets the ball kicked to him and it's like he'll be out there for 4 minutes. He gets the ball swung to him once. He takes a 3 in the corner. He misses it. And this is one shot in 4 minutes. And like maybe the one time he touched the ball in a potential scoring position. So I think him bringing the ball up, like I was curious how he was going to handle the ball pressure. I thought he handled it better than Nick Smith and Bronny. And I think there is something to that, at least in the short term, right? Like I think long term, he is far like lower in the Lakers pecking order offensively in terms of ball handlers. It's going to be Luka first, Austin and LeBron in some order as your top 3, and then Marcus and Gabe in some order 4 or 5. So at best he's at 6th, but you also have LaRavia, who has shown an ability to handle the ball and be a playmaker. That's to say nothing of like Rui and Ayton are going to have certain usage. So it is hard for Dalton to have a certain role, I think, consistently with this group. But for now, that's something I would like to see. And I do think that's a really good point, that they should try to get him maybe initiating the offense even a little bit, especially against like bench units. Cage Britt, Jovan, what's your opinion on all these 40, 50 point scoring games every night? I think one of the big things, and shout out to my guy, Tim Cato, who's at the All City network now and was at, I believe it was like All Dallas. Now he's a national writer, but he noted in one of his recent stories, I believe it went up today, that teams are averaging league-wide 28 free throw attempts per game, which would be, I believe, the highest league average for free throw attempts since like the late 80s. I forget if it's like 87, 89, something like that. So, and it's 6 more free throws per game than last season, like league-wide. So small sample size. It's been obviously a few games for most teams, but one of the big points of emphasis for the NBA and for refs this year has been the space with the jump shooters and like letting them land and being careful with lower extremity injuries and landing on people's feet. And that's been a point. Remember going back like almost a decade ago after the whole Kawhi Zaza thing, that was a big point of emphasis. And now that's kind of come back and been a big point of emphasis again. So I think that's been, like, to be honest, like with Austin, if he doesn't get 22 free throws, he was fouled a lot. So I'm not saying he was not fouled, to be clear, but if he doesn't get 22 free throws against Sacramento, he probably doesn't have a 51-point game. So I think there is an element here of they have been calling more fouls and guys have been getting to the free throw line more. So that's probably led to some of these higher performances where maybe if Austin gets like 14 free throws, he still has the ball so much that he probably gets like in the low 40s or maybe mid 40s, doesn't quite get to 51. And Lauri Markkanen just had 50. I don't know how many free throws he had off the top of my head. I can look it up right now. That game went to overtime. Also been a lot of overtime games, just kind of randomly. Markkanen, 17 free throws, 51 points. So maybe if Markkanen gets, maybe with how they used to ref, that's like 10 free throws or 12 free throws in the past. Markkanen gets 45 points or 43 points or something, right? So I think right now with how games have been refed and some of these overtimes that's just kind of randomness that's led to, like, remember Shea had 55 in double overtime. I think that those have been some of the factors, but it's been a lot of free throws. Can't stop truthfully. Austin scoring like this as a third option is possibly a bad thing because some team looking for a 1B may be more inclined to give him an offer. The Lakers will have to think long and hard. Pause about. Yes and no. Like I think it also shows to the Lakers though how good he is and what his value is, right? And obviously, anytime it's a contract situation as an organization, you want the best deal for yourself. But I think Austin is making like we've talked about 30 million and him probably playing his way up to 35-ish million. With the way he's playing, it's probably getting closer to 40 and his max is 42 to start. So like that's not like out of the realm of possibility here. If he can keep this up, he's not going to average 35 for a full season, but if he could be like mid 20s, if he could average 25, like 5-6 rebounds, 7-8 assists, good percentages, that's probably an all-star season, and he's probably making 40 plus million next summer. So I think it is trending that way. There will be league-wide interest, and it's on the Lakers whether they want to pay him that much. They do have the differentiator in terms of the extra year, which as a guy who's about to be, I believe he's 27. He turns 20. He turns 28 in May, so that like end of May. That is a ways away, but as a guy who's potentially signing a 4 or 5 year deal this summer, that extra year could be the carrot, or maybe he takes like a little bit of a discount, but he gets the extra year and that gives him like the longer term security where the contract will take him through 32 going into 33, where, maybe he gets one more big deal, but then, so I don't know. There's different ways it could shake out, but I mean, like, to your point, I do agree to an extent of like, yes, obviously Austin like playing well is going to drive up his value, and that's not great for the Lakers from like a contract perspective. But I think that's more of like the pessimistic view of it. The optimistic view is the Lakers have an awesome player who they can offer the most years and money to, that puts them in the driver's seat to keep Austin. So sure, there's like maybe an alternate universe where Austin is at like a certain level where maybe teams aren't interested in him, but like he still has value to the Lakers and they get him for like 30 million or 32 or 35. But he's just playing so well now that I also think it should give you like more confidence in Austin long-term with the Lakers and long-term with Luka, because he looks, in my opinion, better than last season. And like, if he continues to just grow and develop, that's a net positive for LA. It might be an expensive net positive, but you'd rather have a better player, in my opinion, than a guy. Like, I'd rather have it be Austin is so good or so great that you almost feel like 40 million is a bargain, rather than Austin being like good and you're like, well, 30 million, I guess it's okay. Like it's not a great contract, but like it's probably worth his value. Like, I think there's a scenario here where he actually just outplays his max, and you're like, the production that he's giving you right now is worth more than 42 million. If you're the Lakers, like that's just is what it is. Now, can he sustain this? That's a totally different situation or context. Like, can he sustain it in the playoffs? Totally, that will obviously determine the final number. But for now, he is out kicking that 42 million. Ken Carter, hey Jovan, what do you think the NBA should do to add more aura to the league? For example, commercials. What do you think players lack that 90s, 2000s, 2010 players had? Really good question. I would say, so I love the NBC and Amazon coverage so far. I think and you've seen, I think it's forced ESPN to step up their coverage with like the coaches corner with Tim Legler. And I think partly them giving Tim Legler a bigger platform has been in response to that. Because we've seen like, I thought Amazon, especially with their whole, they got the LED court and their like TNT for years now has had their court, but it was very like rudimentary in terms of the type of walkthrough stuff that they would do. You had like, they're bringing in Chris Haynes, they're bringing in camera people and producers and stuff to walk through sets and like what's going on. And you have all these intricate actions that they're talking through, and they're actually talking like coverages and just high level stuff that we're not accustomed to seeing on national broadcasts. So I think NBC bringing back Round Ball Rock tonight. They had the on the bench broadcast, like that was cool to see. So I think NBC and Amazon have been like a breath of fresh air for NBA coverage, and they are causing ESPN to step up as well. So I think that's a step in the right direction. I like some of the stuff going on now with Ant and Shea, with Ant's commercial. Like I think Ant and Adidas have nailed it with his campaigns and his commercials. That's been some of the best. I think the rollout with Shea stuff has also been great. So I feel like those guys are bringing back some of that aura, and they feel like they fit with some of the 2000s stuff. I think in general, like feels like basketball shoes and merch and stuff has just not been consumed at the level it once was, or as coveted as it once was, right? Like even as a sneaker guy myself, I just feel like the sneaker game has kind of changed, and with StockX and the resale market and all that stuff, it's just kind of changed that. And now that this stuff is so accessible to everybody everywhere, in some ways it's not as like coveted as it used to be. The other thing though, I think this is like a larger thing with entertainment, and not to get too sidetracked by this, but I do think there's something about like back in the day with fewer entertainment options, with, fewer channels on TV, and more of a concept of like watching things live in more of a monoculture. It just naturally created like, I don't, of course, Michael Jordan is Michael Jordan because he went 6-0 in the finals, and he had all these iconic moments and shots and plays and all this that built the legend of Michael Jordan. But I don't know if there's a way to do this in an alternate timeline, and Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan in the 2020s, and he still went 6-0 and he still had all the same stuff, there would still be people like tearing him down on social media. There would still be, people would have issue with the gambling stuff and him going and playing baseball and like how much he partied and played golf. And like, there would be all these ways to dissect MJ and his aura and stuff. So like, I think part of it's like a monoculture thing, where back in the day there were sporting events and movies and music and things that like we all celebrated as a culture that we don't necessarily, it's fewer and farther between now. And then also with the social media era, these guys get torn apart in ways that just did not happen in the 90s and 2000s. Like there'd be critical things that people would write in magazines or newspapers or whatever, but we have access to these guys at a level that we just didn't have before. And again, even with MJ, you give him the same career now, he's picked apart at a level of, this guy gambles too much, he parties too much, he's out in Atlantic City, he's doing this, he's doing that. Why isn't he focused on the game, right? Like you'd be hearing all that stuff that he didn't hear. It certainly was a storyline back then. Like if you go back, people were writing that, people were criticizing it, but they didn't have Twitter, they didn't have TikTok, they didn't have YouTube, they didn't have all these other platforms that would propel that to the point that I think it becomes a detriment to the players. So I think those are some of the reasons why it's kind of gone away. And I don't know if it can ever come back. I don't think we're ever going to be a monoculture again. And I don't know if I think some of the sheen with athletes and stuff is just kind of gone based on social media and the access we have. But I think NBC and Amazon are bringing back like a lot of the aura and positive stuff with the game. Telly Khalifa, Jovan, you should see if you can get Kenny Beecham on Beyond the Block. I think y'all would be a great duo, by the way. I reached out to him last season but that was more so to talk about Lakers Bulls and try and meet up with him at the game. But he's on my list of people I'm reaching out. So for the people who are saying Jordan would not win 6 rings, you are in a way kind of confirming my point of what I was just saying. But I'm not saying Jordan would win 6 rings. My point was, even if Jordan won 6 rings, like there's this like infallibility, there's like a bulletproofness to Jordan from the 90s that I think if he was in the modern era, he would be dissected in a way. Yeah, I'm saying even if he had the same success, he would not be viewed in the same light because of social media and the way that we view things now. We view athletes in a different light, whereas at that time he was pre-social media era. So it gave him a little bit more of this like aura and legend status that I think we saw kind of started to shift with like the Kobe Shaq era, but more so like once LeBron entered the league, that's when, our relationship with athletes changed. So to be clear, I'm not saying Jordan would still win 6 rings now. I actually probably agree that he wouldn't in the modern era. I think the teams now are better and the quality of play in the league is at a higher level than it was back in the mid 90s or early to late 90s. But that's a whole other topic. My point was just that even if he had the same exact career, people would find reasons to go get, to knock him. That was it. Benji 541, Jovan is better than peak Jordan. Let's be real. I could not agree more. And on that note, I'm going to wrap. I appreciate you. I see Diego Cardona bought tickets to the Miami game. I'm sorry. We'll see if we'll see if who's back by then and whatnot. There's a chance Luka's back, but Thomas, who's your favorite player to interview on this team? I would say, Austin is up there. LeBron is up there because it's just LeBron, and anytime you can talk to him is special. Luka's up there. I would say of like the non like stars that you would assume. Ayton is hilarious, and he's got some great ones. That Marcus Smart, I would say Marcus Smart has been also a someone that I've really enjoyed talking to in the locker room at practice and stuff, and he's got all these quotes that and one-liners. But appreciate you guys. I'm going to wrap here. Thank you so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. On the road to 50K subscribers by the end of 2025. Let's get those subscriber numbers up. If you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Also, if you've not liked this stream yet, please consider doing so. If you made it to this point, why not give it a like? And then for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back tomorrow, probably going live around 2 or 3 p.m. So I will schedule that and let you guys know in the community notes tab. But back tomorrow to talk Lakers, Luka, Austin, all that stuff. So I will talk to you very soon. Enjoy the rest of your night. Peace.